The clock struck midnight as Morgan Rayner stood before his apartment window, staring at the full moon that hung impossibly large in the night sky. Something about this night felt different. His 25th birthday was ending, and with it came a strange restlessness that crawled beneath his skin like electricity searching for ground. The small studio apartment felt more confining than usual, its walls pressing in around him as if they too sensed something was about to change. Morgan ran a hand through his dark hair, catching his reflection in the window glass. The face that looked back at him was handsome in a rough-hewn way, with a strong jaw perpetually darkened by stubble no matter how recently he'd shaved. His eyes, an unusual silver gray that had earned him both admirers and suspicious glances throughout his life, seemed to gleam with an inner light tonight. Those eyes had always been his most distinctive feature, along with the unusual strength that had served him well during his military service and now in his job as security at the Crimson Moon, a nightclub downtown. The small apartment told the story of a man who lived simply, almost sparingly. A used couch, a bed with military corners, bookshelves filled with history and strategy volumes, and a small kitchen with just enough cookware for one. On the wall hung his honorable discharge papers and a single photograph of Morgan in uniform, standing beside fellow soldiers whose faces were now blurred by time and memory. No family pictures adorned his walls or shelves. As far as Morgan knew, he had none. He had been found as an infant, abandoned at a fire station with nothing but a strange silver medallion around his neck. The medallion now hung from a chain around his neck, its surface etched with the image of a wolf's head surrounded by ancient symbols he had never been able to decipher. He touched it now, as he often did when troubled, feeling its familiar weight against his chest. The dreams had been getting worse lately. Dreams of running through forests he had never seen, beneath moonlight that felt more like home than any place he had known while awake. Dreams where his body moved differently, powerful and free, and where voices called to him in a language he shouldn't understand, but somehow did. He had always dismissed them as strange flights of fancy, products of an overactive imagination, or perhaps lingering stress from his tours of duty. But tonight the pull was stronger than ever before. His muscles ached with a strange yearning, as if they were meant to stretch into shapes his conscious mind couldn't comprehend. He had taken the night off work, something he rarely did, driven by an instinct he couldn't name. The knock came exactly as the final chime of midnight faded into silence. It wasn't a tentative knock or the casual rap of a neighbor. This was the kind of knock that commanded attention, that broke through the ordinary world and announced that something extraordinary waited on the other side. 3 sharp, precise impacts that seemed to reverberate through a small apartment with unnatural force. Morgan froze, his body tensing with the instincts of a soldier. Something about that knock triggered warnings in his mind, awakening the hypervigilance that had kept him alive in combat. He moved silently toward the door, avoiding the floorboards he knew would creak. The hair on the back of his neck stood on end as he approached, and a scent reached him that his conscious mind couldn't identify, but that triggered something primitive and ancient within him. Leather, steel, and something weed. Something that smelled like forests after rainfall and the crisp coldness of mountain air. Before he could reach for the handle, a voice spoke from the other side, deep, authoritative, and utterly without warmth. Morgan Rayner, by order of King Gideon Shadowcrest, Alpha of the 7 Packs, you are summoned to the Obsidian Palace. Immediately. Morgan stood frozen, hand halfway to the doorknob. King? Alpha? The words made no sense, and yet they sent a shiver of recognition down his spine, as if part of him had been waiting to hear them his entire life. There must be some mistake, he called through the door, his voice steadier than he felt. A moment of silence followed, then the same voice, tinged now with something that might have been amusement. There is no mistake, Morgan Silverblood. Open the door. We can enter without your permission, but we extend the courtesy out of respect for your bloodline. Silverblood. The name hit Morgan like a physical blow, resonating with something deep and forgotten. His hand moved to the medallion at his chest again, fingers tracing the wolf's head embossed on its surface. When he finally opened the door, the sight that greeted him stole his breath. 5 figures stood in the dimly lit hallway of his apartment building, their presence seeming to suck the very light from the air around them. They were clad in what appeared to be military-grade tactical gear, but with subtle differences that marked it as something else entirely. Armor plates that seemed to drink in the light rather than reflect it. Weapons that looked both ancient and devastatingly modern at the same time. But it was their eyes that truly marked them as other. Each pair glowed with an amber luminescence that no human eyes could possess, predatory and alert. At their center stood a woman whose presence commanded attention despite her being the smallest among them. Captain Lyra Steelheart couldn't have been more than 5.5 feet tall, but she carried herself with the unshakable confidence of someone who had never known defeat. A jagged scar ran from her right temple down to her jaw, stark white against her bronze skin. Her black hair was pulled back in a tight braid that reached her mid-back, and her amber eyes assessed Morgan with the calculation of a predator. "You have the look of your mother," she said, her voice surprisingly gentle compared to her appearance. "But you stand like your father." Before Morgan could process this statement, let alone respond to it, she reached into a pouch at her belt and withdrew something that caught the hallway light. A medallion identical to the one he wore, except this one hung from a chain of what appeared to be white gold, rather than the simple leather cord that held his. "This belongs to you, heir of the silver pack," she said, extending it toward him. "A second key to your birthright, hidden separately to ensure at least one would reach you when the time came." Morgan stared at the medallion, identical in every detail to the one that had been with him his entire life. The same wolf's head, the same ancient symbols around its edge. Seeing its twin shattered something in his mind, broke through barriers he hadn't known existed. "Who am I?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "That," said Lyra, "is what the king will explain. You have 30 seconds to gather what you need. Nothing from this life will matter much where we're going, but bring what gives you comfort. The transition is never easy." Morgan moved as if in a dream, gathering his wallet, phone, and a small go-bag he had always kept packed out of military habit. His fingers hesitated over the photograph of his unit before adding it to the bag. Whatever was happening, whatever strange new reality was asserting itself, he wasn't ready to let go of everything just yet. When he returned to the door, Lyra nodded approvingly. "Good. You prepare like a warrior." She handed him the second medallion, which he took with numb fingers. "Wear them both when you meet the king." As they moved through the hallway toward the stairs, Morgan noticed how his neighbors' doors remained firmly shut despite the commotion. No curious faces peeked out, no voices called questions. It was as if the entire building was holding its breath, pretending not to notice as something impossible walked among them. Outside, the night air hit Morgan's face with unusual clarity. Scents he had never noticed before assaulted his senses. The garbage in the alley 3 buildings down, the faint trace of perfume from someone who had walked this path hours earlier, the distant smell of the river that cut through downtown. His hearing, too, seemed preternaturally sharp, catching conversations from apartments above and the scurrying of small animals in the bushes across the street. Instead of the vehicles he had expected, they approached what appeared to be an ordinary service entrance to the subway station at the end of his block. A station that, as far as Morgan knew, had been closed for renovations for the past year. "The veils between worlds are thinnest in places of transition," Lyra explained, noticing his confusion. "Stations, crossroads, bridges, places where humans naturally expect reality to shift slightly." 2 of her guards moved ahead, placing their hands against what appeared to be solid concrete. Symbols briefly flared to life beneath their palms, ancient writing that glowed with inner fire before fading just as quickly. The wall before them seemed to ripple like water, and then an opening appeared where solid stone had been moments before. "Welcome to the old roads, Morgan Silverblood," Lyra said. "The paths that existed before your kind forgot how to see them." The passage beyond looked nothing like a subway tunnel. It was wider, the ceiling higher, and constructed of what appeared to be seamlessly fitted stone blocks that gleamed with an inner luminescence. The air smelled of earth and age and something Morgan couldn't name, but that reminded him of his dreams of running through ancient forests. They had walked perhaps half a mile when the attack came. It happened without warning. One moment they were moving in formation through the tunnel. The next, something dark and impossibly fast dropped from the ceiling. Morgan caught only a glimpse of gleaming teeth and too many limbs before Lyra shoved him roughly against the wall and drew her weapon in a single fluid motion. The thing moved like liquid shadow, flowing around the guards as they tried to engage it. It wasn't like any animal Morgan had ever seen, its body seemingly capable of changing shape at will, extending limbs that ended in wicked claws. The guards were skilled fighters, their movements synchronized with practiced precision. But the creature was unnaturally fast. One guard went down, blood spraying from a gash across his chest. Another was slammed against the wall hard enough to crack the stone. The remaining two formed a protective barrier between the creature and Morgan, while Lyra engaged it directly. Her weapon wasn't a gun, as Morgan had initially thought. It was something more akin to a short sword, but the blade seemed to shift between solid and light, leaving trails of silver fire in the air as she moved. She fought with the grace of someone born to combat, each movement flowing into the next without hesitation or wasted energy. But even her skill wasn't enough. The creature anticipated her attack, one shadowy limb wrapping around her ankle and yanking her off balance. As she fell, the thing lunged toward Morgan, jaws opening to reveal rows of needle-like teeth. What happened next would forever change Morgan's understanding of himself. He didn't think. There was no conscious decision, no plan of action. His body simply moved, driven by instincts he never knew he possessed. He caught the creature's attack with bare hands, feeling claws tear into his flesh without registering pain. Something primal and ancient rose within him, a roaring fury that started in his chest and spread outward like wildfire through his veins. His vision sharpened until he could see every detail of the creature before him, count every tooth in its grotesque mouth. Time seemed to slow as strength he had never known he possessed flooded his muscles. With a roar that didn't sound human even to his own ears, Morgan tore the creature's grasping limbs away from his body and slammed it into the tunnel wall with enough force to shatter stone. The creature made a high, keening sound, its form wavering like smoke and wind. Before it could recover, Morgan was on it again, driven by instinct and rage, tearing at its shadowy substance with hands that felt as though they should end in claws rather than fingers. He might have destroyed it completely if Lyra hadn't placed a hand on his shoulder, her touch somehow cutting through the red haze that had descended over his mind. "Enough," she said quietly. "It's a scout, not a warrior. We need to move before more come." Morgan stepped back, his chest heaving with exertion and the aftermath of adrenaline. Looking down at his hands, he expected to see them mangled from the creature's claws. Instead, the deep gashes were already closing, flesh knitting together before his eyes. Only the blood smeared across his skin, and the tears in his shirt indicated he had been wounded at all. "What am I?" he whispered. Lyra's amber eyes met his, and for the first time he saw genuine respect in her gaze. "You are the heir to the Silver Throne, last scion of the most powerful werewolf bloodline ever to exist. And that," she nodded toward the creature now being restrained by her remaining guards, "is why your existence has been hidden for 25 years. The shadows have never stopped hunting for you." The journey resumed with greater urgency, their pace quickening as they moved deeper into the network of tunnels. The wounded guard had been helped to his feet, his injuries apparently less severe than Morgan had initially thought. Like Morgan's own wounds, they seemed to be healing at an accelerated rate. They emerged eventually into a vast underground cavern, so large that Morgan couldn't see its far boundaries. Unlike the rough natural formations he would have expected, this space had been shaped by intelligent hands. Columns carved to resemble ancient trees supported a ceiling inlaid with what appeared to be actual stars, twinkling with the same patterns as the night sky above ground. And at the center of the cavern stood a man who seemed as ancient and immovable as the stone around them. General Marcus Ironheart was a living legend, though Morgan hadn't known it until that moment. Standing well over 6 feet tall, with shoulders broad enough to suggest that the passage of 65 years had done little to diminish his physical power, Marcus cut an imposing figure. His face was a roadmap of scars and experiences, deep lines etched around eyes that had seen more of the world than most could imagine. His hair, once black but now almost completely silver, was cut in a military style that matched his bearing. He wore what appeared to be formal military dress, though no human military Morgan had ever encountered used such designs. The uniform was midnight blue, nearly black, with silver accents that caught the light when he moved. Medals and insignia adorned his chest, telling stories of battles and honors that Morgan couldn't decipher. "You found him," Marcus said, his voice a deep rumble that seemed to resonate in the stone beneath their feet. It wasn't a question. "We did," Lyra confirmed, "and he's already awakening. He fought off a shadow scout with his bare hands, Marcus. Untrained, unshifted." The old general's eyebrows rose slightly, the only indication of surprise on his otherwise impassive face. He approached Morgan slowly, his gaze taking in every detail, lingering on the medallion now visible at Morgan's throat, and the matching one clutched in his hand. "You have your father's build," he said finally, "but those eyes are pure silver moon. I'd know them anywhere." "You knew my parents," Morgan said, finding his voice at last. It wasn't a question either. "I served them," Marcus corrected. "I was captain of the Royal Guard for the Silver Pack for 30 years. I watched your father grow from a headstrong pup into the greatest alpha the North had ever known. I held you the day you were born." His voice softened slightly. "And I carried you away the night they died." The words hit Morgan like physical blows. Parents, Silver Pack, Alpha. Each term resonated with something deep within him, triggering fragments of memories so old and buried he hadn't known they existed. Images flashed before his mind's eye, a grand hall filled with people, a woman's gentle hands, a man's booming laugh, the warm safety of Pack. "Why?" Morgan asked, the single word containing a lifetime of questions. Marcus's weathered face grew solemn. "Because I made a vow to your mother that if the worst should happen, I would ensure the bloodline survived. When the attack Bashad came and when it became clear the Silver Palace would fall, Queen Elena enacted the ancient rite of concealment on you, binding your wolf deep within your human form. She hid one medallion with you, gave the other to me for safekeeping, and then," his voice faltered for the first time, "then she returned to fight alongside your father, buying time for me to get you to safety." "They knew they would die," Morgan said softly, understanding dawning like a cold sun. Marcus nodded once, sharply. "They were rulers in the truest sense. They put their pack, their people, their son before themselves." He straightened, shoulders squaring. "I have watched over you from a distance all these years, ensured you were placed with decent human foster families, intervened when necessary to keep you safe without revealing your existence to those who still hunt the silver bloodline." "The military?" Morgan asked, pieces falling into place. "A suggestion planted in the right minds," Marcus confirmed. "You needed training, discipline, to learn to control the strength and reflexes that even your bound wolf could not fully suppress. The human military was a crude substitute for proper pack training, but it served its purpose." Morgan's mind was reeling with revelations, each answer spawning a dozen new questions. Before he could voice any of them, a new figure emerged from a side passage, moving with the careful deliberation of advanced age. Grand Duke Nathaniel Ravenwood looked exactly as a royal historian and archivist should. Tall and thin, with a scholar's slight stoop to his shoulders, he nevertheless carried himself with the dignity of one who had counseled kings. His face was deeply lined, particularly around eyes that had spent decades poring over ancient texts, and his beard was trimmed to aristocratic precision. Unlike Marcus's military uniform, Nathaniel wore robes of deep burgundy embroidered with silver thread that formed patterns too complex for Morgan to follow. "So this is the last silver blood," Nathaniel said, his voice surprisingly strong for his apparent age. "Come, young heir, we have little time before your audience with the king, and there is much you should see first." At a nod from Marcus, Morgan followed the old scholar through winding passages that gradually transitioned from rough stone to worked masonry, and finally to polished marble as they ascended through what Nathaniel explained was the ancient foundation of the Obsidian Palace. "Few remember that the modern city above was built upon the ruins of one much older," Nathaniel explained as they walked. "Human archaeologists occasionally stumble upon fragments, attributing them to indigenous settlements or colonial structures. They never dig deep enough to find the true foundations, the stones laid by the first packs, when our kind still lived in harmony." The corridors they now traversed were lined with tapestries and artifacts that told the story of a civilization Morgan had never known existed. Werewolves, it seemed, had been organized into 7 major packs for millennia, each with its own territory, traditions, and ruling bloodline. The Silver Pack of the North had traditionally been the strongest. their affinity for cold climates and mountainous terrain, making them natural protectors of the northern borders against ancient enemies Nathaniel alluded to but did not name. Your bloodline has always been special, Nathaniel said, pausing before a particularly impressive tapestry showing a silver wolf standing atop a mountain, howling at a full moon while smaller wolves gathered below. The Silver Bloods were the first to master the full transformation, to move seamlessly between human, wolf, and the warrior form between. Some say your ancestors made a pact with the moon herself, offering eternal service in exchange for her blessing. They continued upward, Amun, passing through galleries filled with portraits of stern-faced men and women bearing noble titles Morgan had never heard of, yet which triggered that strange sense of familiarity he was coming to associate with his awakening heritage. And then he saw her. The portrait hung in a place of honor at the end of a long gallery, illuminated by shafts of moonlight from a skylight above. A woman with Morgan's own silver-gray eyes looked out from the canvas, her gaze so intense and moth-like that he half expected her to speak. Her hair was silver white, falling in waves around a face of otherworldly beauty and unmistakable authority. She wore what appeared to be ceremonial armor, sleek and functional rather than decorative, with the same wolf medallion Morgan wore prominent at her throat. Queen Elena Silvermoon, Nathaniel said softly. Your mother, the last true Luna of the Silver Pack, and some say the most powerful in 10 generations. It was rumored she could track a scent across 100 miles, communicate with her pack members across vast distances through the pack bond, and see glimpses of possible futures in the light of the full moon. Morgan stared at the portrait, drinking in the details of the mother he couldn't remember. There was something in her expression, a combination of strength and sadness, as if she had foreseen her own fate but moved toward it willingly nonetheless. And my father, he asked, voice rough with emotion he couldn't name. Nathaniel gestured to the portrait hanging opposite, which Morgan had been too transfixed to notice. A man stood tall and proud with Morgan's build and jawline, but eyes of deep amber rather than silver. He wore more traditional regalia, furs and leather adorned with symbols of rank and honor, and his expression was one of absolute confidence and determination. High Alpha Orion Silverblood, Nathaniel said. Strongest warrior of his generation, undefeated in ritual combat from the age of 16. He united the fractured northern territories through both conquest and diplomacy, earning the title of High Alpha by right of strength and wisdom, rather than merely blood. Morgan felt a strange ache in his chest as he looked between the portraits of the parents he had lost before he could know them. There was pride there, but also an acute sense of loss for the life he should have had, the legacy he should have grown up knowing. What happened to them, he asked, though part of him dreaded the answer. Nathaniel and Marcus exchanged a look heavy with old grief and unspoken history. That, came a new voice from the far end of the gallery, is something best explained by one who witnessed the aftermath firsthand. King Gideon Shadowcrest moved like the predator he was, with a fluid grace that made even his measured walk seem like the prelude to a pounce. At 35, he was in his prime, his body honed to the perfect balance of speed and strength. Unlike the formal attire Morgan might have expected from royalty, Gideon wore what appeared to be combat gear, matte black with subtle armor reinforcement at vital points. The only concessions to his rank were the silver circlet that sat upon his close-cropped black hair and the heavy signet ring on his right hand, bearing what Morgan assumed was the royal crest. His eyes were the deep gold of old amber, assessing Morgan with the calculating gaze of an apex predator, deciding whether another creature represented prey, threat, or potential ally. "Leave us," Gideon commanded, and though his voice was quiet, it carried the unquestionable expectation of obedience. Marcus and Nathaniel bowed respectfully and withdrew, though Morgan noted the concerned glance the old general cast back at him before disappearing down the corridor. For a long moment, Gideon simply studied Morgan, his gaze taking in every detail from the military posture to the medallions at his throat. 25 years, he finally said. 25 years since the Silver's palace fell. 25 years of searching for the lost heir, never certain if you had survived or if the bloodline had truly ended. And now here you stand, untrained and unaware of your heritage, yet already showing signs of your birthright. His eyes narrowed slightly. Lyra tells me you fought a shadow scout with your bare hands. Morgan found himself standing straighter under that penetrating gaze. I didn't think about it, I just reacted. Blood will tell, Gideon said with a slight nod, as if this confirmed something. Come, the throne room is a more appropriate place for the rest of this conversation. The walls there have older and stronger protections against unwelcome ears. The throne room of the Obsidian Palace was not what Morgan had expected. Rather than the ornate, gilded ostentation of human royalty, this was a space designed for the practical needs of apex predators who occasionally needed to conduct business in human form. The ceiling soared overhead, supported by columns carved to resemble ancient trees, their branches spreading to form natural arches. The floor was polished stone, veined with what appeared to be actual silver, forming patterns that Morgan realized were ley lines, channels for the natural energy that he could now somehow sense flowing beneath the surface. The throne itself sat atop a dais of 7 steps, each representing one of the major packs. It was carved from a single piece of obsidian, sleek and minimalist in design, with only the stylized wolf heads on the armrests as decoration. Behind it, a massive window of what appeared to be crystal rather than glass provided a view of the full moon, now directly overhead. Gideon did not immediately take his seat. Instead, he paced the perimeter of the room, checking protections that Morgan could sense but not see, ensuring their privacy. "What do you know of the night your parents died?" he asked abruptly, turning to face Morgan. "Nothing," Morgan admitted. "Until tonight, I didn't even know who they were." Gideon's expression tightened. "Then I will tell you what I know, which is more than most, but less than you deserve. 25 years ago, the Silver Palace was attacked during the night of the winter solstice, when most of the pack was gathered for the traditional celebrations. The attackers came from within and without simultaneously, suggesting months if not years of planning and infiltration." He moved to a side table where a decanter of amber liquid sat beside crystal glasses. Pouring 2 measures, he handed one to Morgan before continuing. "By the time word reached my father, then king of the 7 packs, the Silver Palace was already falling. The entire ruling family was reported dead, along with most of the royal guards and a significant portion of the pack. My father dispatched troops, but by the time they arrived, there was nothing but ruins and bodies." He paused, his grip tightening on his glass. "No survivors were found. The official record states that the Silver bloodline ended that night." "But you didn't believe that," Morgan said, insight flashing through him. Gideon's amber eyes met his, something like approval flickering in their depths. "No. I was just a prince then, 10 years from the throne, but I had studied enough history to know that no ruling pack would fail to have contingency plans for their heir. The fact that no body was found for the infant prince was suspicious enough, but there were other inconsistencies in the investigation. Such as? Such as the fact that the investigation was barely an investigation at all," Gideon said, a growl entering his voice. "My father accepted the tragedy with what I later came to realize was suspicious readiness. There were whispers that certain southern packs might have been involved, traditional rivals of the Silver Pack, but these leads were never pursued. No justice was ever sought for the slaughter of an entire ruling bloodline." Morgan took a slow drink from his glass, the liquid burning a trail down his throat. "And that bothered you?" "It did more than bother me. It became my obsession." Gideon stalked toward the window, moonlight silvering his profile. "When I took the throne after my father's death 10 years ago, I reopened the investigation privately. I had Marcus Ironheart, by then retired from official service, search for any trace of survivors. It was he who eventually found the trail that led to you, though it took years to confirm your identity without alerting those who might still wish the Silver bloodline to remain extinct." He turned back to Morgan, his expression grave. "And now you understand why you were summoned tonight, on your 25th birthday, when the binding spell your mother placed would begin to weaken with the maturation of your wolf." "You want justice for my parents," Morgan said. It made sense, aligned with the strong sense of honor he could already perceive in Gideon. "That is part of it," Gideon agreed. "A debt of blood has gone unpaid for 25 years, and I believe my father was somehow complicit in allowing that to happen. But there is more." He set down his glass and approached Morgan, stopping just within arm's reach. The 7 packs are fractured. Old alliances have crumbled, territorial disputes grow more frequent, and there are threats gathering beyond our borders that we cannot face while divided. Morgan began to understand. You think my return could unite them? I think your bloodline carries a power and legitimacy that none can deny, Gideon corrected. The Silver Pack were the peacekeepers of the North for 1,000 years. They were respected even by their rivals. If you claim your birthright, it could shift the balance of power enough to force the other packs to the negotiating table. Before Morgan could respond, the doors at the far end of the throne room opened to admit a woman whose presence immediately commanded attention. Lady Eleanor Moonshadow entered as if she owned the space, her movements fluid and confident, her expression one of carefully controlled interest as her gaze settled on Morgan. She was, without question, the most beautiful woman Morgan had ever seen, though not in any conventional human sense. Her beauty was dangerous, predatory, a reminder that true wolves were not the friendly domesticated creatures of human imagination, but apex hunters perfectly evolved for their environment. Tall and lithe, with the coiled muscular grace of a natural athlete, she moved across the throne room with the silent precision of a stalking wolf. Her hair was black as a moonless night, falling in waves to her mid-back, framing a face of high cheekbones, full lips currently curved in a speculative smile, and eyes of such a deep amber they appeared almost golden. She wore what appeared to be formal diplomatic attire, a fitted black suit with subtle embroidery at the collar and cuffs, the cut emphasizing her athletic build rather than attempting to soften it. So the rumors are true, she said, her voice a melodic contralto with the barest hint of an accent Morgan couldn't place. The lost Silverblood heir has returned from the dead. Her gaze raked over him, assessing and slightly mocking, though perhaps not quite ready for court from the look of him. Lady Eleanor, Gideon said, and though his tone was perfectly polite, Morgan sensed tension between them. Your presence was not requested for this meeting. Forgive me, my king, she replied, though her tone held not an ounce of actual contrition. But as Luna of the Black Pack and daughter of the Southern Alliance, I believed it my duty to verify such a significant development personally. After all, the return of the Silver Heir affects all the packs, does it not? Gideon's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. It does, which is why I intended to present Morgan formally to the Council of Alphas once he had been properly prepared for the role he must play. Eleanor smiled, the expression not reaching her eyes. Of course, though I wonder if young Morgan here knows exactly what role that is. She turned to him directly. Did His Majesty mention that you and I were betrothed before your unfortunate disappearance? A political alliance arranged by our parents to unite North and South. Morgan felt as if the floor had dropped from beneath him. First learning of his heritage, then the circumstances of his parents' deaths, and now this woman claiming they had been promised to each other as children. He hadn't gotten to that part yet, Morgan replied, surprised by the steadiness of his own voice. Eleanor laughed, the sound like dark velvet. No, I imagine there are many parts of this situation our king has yet to reveal. She moved closer, close enough that Morgan could catch her scent. Something wild and floral at once, like night-blooming jasmine mixed with the musk of a predator. We were just children when the contract was signed, of course. I was barely 5, you not yet 2, but such arrangements have been the backbone of pack politics for centuries. Her eyes, those unsettling gold eyes, studied his face with open curiosity. You have your mother's eyes, the famous silver moon eyes that could, according to legend, see past deception and into the very souls of those they judged. She reached out, her movements deliberate and challenging, and brushed her fingers against the medallion at his throat. The moment her skin made contact with the silver, a jolt like electricity passed between them. Morgan saw her eyes widen fractionally, felt his own heart rate accelerate in response to something he had no name for. It was recognition on a level deeper than conscious thought, a pull that seemed to originate from the very core of his being. Eleanor withdrew her hand as if burned, her composed expression faltering for just a moment before her mask of cool amusement returned. Interesting, she murmured. Perhaps there is more of the wolf in you than I expected, despite your human upbringing. Lady Eleanor, Gideon cut in, his voice carrying a subtle warning. Perhaps you could make yourself useful and inform your father that we will be calling an emergency session of the council in 3 days' time. That should allow Morgan sufficient opportunity to learn the basics of what he will face. It was a dismissal, thinly veiled but unmistakable. Eleanor inclined her head in acknowledgement, though her posture suggested it was a concession rather than submission. Of course, my king. She turned to Morgan once more, that speculative smile playing at her lips. Until the council meeting then, Morgan Silverblood, I look forward to seeing what becomes of you once the full moon calls your wolf to the surface. With that parting comment, she turned and glided from the room with the same silent grace with which she had entered. As the doors closed behind her, Gideon released a controlled breath that was nearly a growl. The daughter of Lord Darius Moonshadow, Luna of the Black Pack, and a political player in her own right. You would do well to be cautious around her. The Moonshadow family has always been ambitious, and they were among those who benefited most from the fall of the Silver Pack, expanding their territory into what was once your family's domain. Yet I was betrothed to her, Morgan said, still processing this revelation. Politics make strange bedfellows, Gideon replied with a grim smile. The alliance was meant to end generations of border disputes between the Silver and Black Packs. Whether it would have succeeded, we will never know. He paused, studying Morgan's expression. But she was right about one thing. The full moon will call to your wolf, especially now that you've returned to your kind and the binding spell begins to weaken. We have 3 days until the council meeting, and much to accomplish in that time. Morgan looked down at the twin medallions he now wore, physical proof of a heritage he was only beginning to understand. I still don't know what I am. Not really. I've lived my entire life as a human. I don't know how to be this heir you all expect. Gideon's expression softened slightly, showing a glimpse of the man beneath the crown. No one expects you to transform into a born alpha overnight, Morgan. But the blood in your veins carries memories older than conscious thought. Your instincts in the tunnel prove that. Your wolf is awakening, and with it will come knowledge and abilities you never imagined. He approached Morgan again, and this time placed a hand on his shoulder, the gesture formal but not without compassion. You are Morgan Silverblood, heir to the Silver Throne, last scion of a bloodline that ruled the North for 1,000 years. Your parents were murdered, their killers never brought to justice. Your birthright was stolen, your heritage hidden from you. But you have survived, against all odds, and returned at a time when the 7 packs faced threats greater than any in living memory. His grip tightened slightly, emphasizing his next words. I cannot promise you an easy path. The politics of the packs are deadly. Alliances shift like shadow, and there are those who will see your return as a threat to the power they have accumulated in your absence. But I can promise you truth and the chance to discover who you truly are, the chance to reclaim what was taken from you, and perhaps to find justice for your parents. The weight of history and expectation pressed down on Morgan's shoulders, heavier than any pack he had carried during his military service. Yet with it came a strange sense of rightness, as if pieces of himself that had never quite fit together were finally finding their proper alignment. When do we start? He asked. Gideon's amber eyes gleamed with approval and something that might have been relief. We already have. But the real work begins tomorrow, with the ritual of remembrance. Ilara Wiseheart, our most skilled memory worker, will attempt to recover what fragments may remain of your earliest memories. And then we must prepare for your first transformation. The full moon rises in 4 nights, and with it, your true nature will emerge fully for the first time. As if in response to these words, Morgan felt something stir within him, a presence both alien and intimately familiar. His wolf, awakening from a 25-year slumber, called to by the moon visible through the crystal window, and the heritage now being reclaimed. For the first time in his life, Morgan Rayner, now Morgan Silverblood, felt the beginning of something like belonging. The Northern Tower had stood empty for 25 years, sealed by royal decree after the massacre. As Morgan followed Lyra through corridors that grew progressively more ancient, he felt the weight of history pressing against him from all sides. The walls here held memories, some recorded in the intricate murals depicting wolves running beneath full moons, others lingering like ghosts in the very stone itself. Dawn was breaking beyond the tower windows, painting the mountains beyond the palace in hues of gold and amber. Morgan had not slept, though a chamber had been prepared for him. How could he sleep when every moment brought new revelations, new fragments of a heritage he was only beginning to understand? The topmost chamber of the northern tower was circular, its ceiling a dome of crystal that captured the first light of day and scattered it in prismatic patterns across the floor. The room was sparsely furnished, a circular table of polished silver wood at its center, surrounded by 7 high-backed chairs and shelves lining the walls filled with ancient tomes and artifacts. A woman waited beside one of the tall windows, her silhouette backlit by the rising sun. Dr. Alara Weishart turned as they entered, her movements deliberate and graceful despite her 60 years. Her face bore the dignified lines of age and wisdom, framed by hair that had once been auburn, but was now predominantly silver, worn in an intricate braid that reached her waist. Her eyes, a startling shade of green rarely seen among werewolves, assessed Morgan with clinical precision. "So this is the lost heir," she said, her voice carrying the slight accent of the Eastern Territories. "I see Elena's work in the binding. Elegant, powerful, desperate." She approached Morgan without waiting for an introduction, her gaze intensifying. "May I?" Morgan glanced at Lyra, who nodded almost imperceptibly. "Yes," he said, though he wasn't entirely sure what he was agreeing to. Alara placed her palms on either side of his face, her touch cool and impersonal. The moment her skin made contact with his, Morgan felt a strange sensation, like fingers gently rifling through the pages of a book. Except the book was his mind, his memories, his very essence. "Remarkable," Alara murmured. "The binding should have weakened significantly by now, yet it holds. Your mother's power was extraordinary, even greater than the history's record." She released him, stepping back with a thoughtful expression. "But there is damage, fractures in the spell matrix. Your wolf stirs beneath the surface, testing its constraints. The binding will not hold much longer." "Is that not what we want?" Morgan asked. "For me to access my true nature?" Alara's expression grew grave. "What we want and what is safe are not always aligned, young prince. Your mother did not bind your wolf merely to hide you from your enemies. The binding serves another purpose, one I suspect even King Gideon does not fully comprehend." Before Morgan could press for clarification, the door opened to admit Gideon himself, accompanied by Marcus and Nathaniel. The king had changed from the combat gear of the previous night into more formal attire, though still practical in design. A silver circlet rested upon his brow, the only obvious symbol of his rank. "Alara," Gideon acknowledged the doctor with a respectful nod. "Your assessment?" "The binding is complex," she replied, "multi-layered. The outer spellwork is indeed designed to suppress his wolf nature, to render him essentially human to all but the most careful observation. But beneath that," she hesitated, her gaze flicking to Morgan. "Beneath that is something else. A containment spell of remarkable potency woven into the very fabric of his being." "Containment?" Gideon's brow furrowed. "What would Queen Elena need to contain within her own son?" Elara spread her hands in a gesture of uncertainty. "That I cannot yet determine. But I sense tremendous power held in check, something beyond the typical abilities of even alpha bloodlines." She turned her attention back to Morgan. "We must proceed carefully with the unbinding, a controlled awakening rather than a sudden rupture." The next hours passed in a blur of ritual and instruction. Morgan was directed to sit within a circle inscribed upon the floor in silver, while Alara prepared ingredients for what she called the memory draft. Herbs and crystals were ground together in a mortar of white stone, mixed with clear spring water, and 3 drops of Morgan's own blood. "The mind and body remember what the conscious self forgets," Alara explained as she worked. "This ritual will not restore what has been truly lost, but it may help surface memories buried beneath the binding spell. Fragments of your earliest years that may prove crucial to understanding your heritage and the nature of your mother's final act." The draft tasted of bitterness and ancient earth, with an underlying metallic tang that Morgan recognized as his own blood. As he swallowed, Alara began to chant in a language he had never heard yet somehow understood, her voice rising and falling in rhythmic patterns that seemed to resonate with something deep within his chest. The effect was immediate and disorienting. The room around him blurred and shifted, colors bleeding into one another as his perception altered. Suddenly, he was no longer seeing through his adult eyes, but through those of a child, cradled in strong arms, looking up at a face he recognized from the portrait gallery, his father. Orion Silverblood's features were alight with pride as he held his infant son aloft beneath a full moon, the gathered pack howling their acceptance of the new heir. The memory was fragmentary, more impression than detail, suffused with the overwhelming sense of belonging and safety. Another flash, his mother's face, her silver eyes filled with love and something darker, fear, concern. She was singing to him, a lullaby in that ancient language, her voice weaving magic into melody as her fingers traced patterns on his brow. Then darkness, shouting, the acrid smell of smoke and the metallic scent of blood. Being wrapped in furs, a medallion pressed into his tiny hand, hushed voices urgent with fear. Marcus, younger but unmistakable, his face grim as he carried Morgan through hidden passages, away from the sounds of battle and death. The visions came faster now, overwhelming in their intensity. His mother performing the binding ritual, tears streaming down her face as she locked away her son's true nature. The pain of it, the sense of something essential being pushed down, contained, hidden away, and her final words pressed into his mind like a brand. When the silver moon rises on your 25th year, remember who you are. Morgan gasped as the visions released him, finding himself on his knees in the center of the silver circle, his body trembling with the aftermath of remembered trauma. Alara knelt beside him, her expression concerned but also deeply curious. "What did you see?" she asked quietly. "The night of the attack," Morgan managed, his voice raw. "My mother performing the binding ritual. She knew they wouldn't survive. She and my father, they sacrificed themselves to ensure I would escape." Gideon stepped forward, his expression grave. "Did you see the attackers? Any detail could be crucial." Morgan shook his head, frustration evident. "Only shadows, confusion. I was too young to understand what was happening." He looked up at Alara. "But my mother's final message was clear. When the silver moon rises on your 25th year, remember who you are." She intended the binding to weaken now, at this specific time. "And the question," Marcus said from where he stood by the window, "is why now? What is different about this moment in time that Elena Silvermoon, with her gift for foresight, would choose it for her son's return?" No one had an answer, but Morgan felt the weight of destiny settling more firmly upon his shoulders. Whatever purpose his mother had intended for him was beginning to unfold, 25 years in the making. The remainder of the day was devoted to more practical matters. If Morgan was to stand before the Council of Alphas in 3 days' time, he needed at least a rudimentary understanding of pack politics, protocol, and his own heritage. Nathaniel took charge of this education, his scholarly precision making him an excellent, if somewhat long-winded instructor. Morgan learned of the traditional territories of the 7 packs, their historical alliances and conflicts, the complex web of treaties that had maintained an uneasy peace since the fall of the Silver Pack. The Silver Pack of the North, Nathaniel explained, indicating the vast territories on an ancient map, were traditionally the peacekeepers, their central location and superior strength allowing them to mediate disputes between the others. The Black Pack of the South, led now by Lord Darius Moonshadow, were always their primary rivals, though the betrothal between you and Lady Eleanor was meant to forge a lasting alliance. Morgan studied the map, noting how the territories of the Black Pack had expanded northward in the years following the Silver Pack's fall. And the others? The Red Pack of the East, led by Lord Sebastian Bloodfang, control the coastal territories and have traditionally been merchants and traders. The Shadow Pack of the West hold the mountain passes and forests, isolationists for the most part, but fierce warriors when roused. The River Pack, the Stone Pack, and the Wind Pack are smaller but still significant, often serving as swing votes in council matters. The political landscape Nathaniel described was complex and treacherous, alliances shifting with each generation, old grievances nursed for centuries. Without the stabilizing influence of the Silver Pack, tensions had grown, territories were disputed with increasing frequency, and whispers of open conflict had begun to circulate. King Gideon has held the peace through sheer force of will and political acumen, Nathaniel concluded. But even his authority is not absolute. The Council of Alphas can overrule him in certain matters, particularly those concerning territory or interpack relations. Your return changes the balance of power significantly. As dusk approached, Morgan was led to the training grounds deep beneath the Obsidian Palace. Here, in chambers carved from living stone and reinforced with ancient magic, werewolves could train in all their forms without fear of human discovery. Gideon awaited him, once again dressed in combat gear, his expression stern but not unkind. "Theory is valuable," he said, "but the challenges you will face require more than knowledge. Your body remembers what your mind has forgotten. We must reawaken those instincts." The training that followed was unlike anything Morgan had experienced in the human military. It began with basic combat forms, movements that felt strangely familiar to his muscles even as his conscious mind struggled to follow them. Gideon was a demanding instructor, correcting Morgan's form with brisk efficiency, pushing him to reach for the wolf reflexes buried beneath the human facade. "Your senses are already sharpening," Gideon observed as Morgan successfully dodged an attack from behind, responding to a change in air pressure he wouldn't have noticed days before. "The binding weakens with each passing hour. Soon you will begin to experience more dramatic changes." As if summoned by his words, a sharp pain lanced through Morgan's skull, driving him to his knees. It felt as if something was clawing at the inside of his mind, demanding release. His vision blurred, then sharpened to preternatural clarity. Sense flooded his awareness. The sweat of their exertion, the ancient stone beneath them, the distinct personal odors of every person he had encountered that day. "What's happening to me?" he gasped, fingers digging into the stone floor hard enough to leave impressions. Gideon knelt beside him, his presence steady and calming. "Your wolf stirs, fighting against 25 years of captivity." He placed a firm hand on Morgan's shoulder. "Don't resist it. That only causes pain. Breathe, accept what rises within you." Morgan struggled to follow the instruction, to welcome rather than fight the foreign presence that felt increasingly familiar. The pain receded slightly, though it didn't disappear entirely. When he looked up, he caught his reflection in a polished shield hanging on the wall. His eyes had changed, the irises now glowing with the same silver luminescence he had seen in his mother's portrait. "Better," Gideon said with approval. "But this is only the beginning. Each episode will be stronger than the last as we approach the full moon. You must learn to ride these waves of change rather than being overwhelmed by them." Their training continued, adapted now to incorporate Morgan's fluctuating abilities. Sometimes he moved with inhuman speed and grace, only to stumble moments later as his body readjusted to its changing nature. By the time they finished for the night, he was exhausted but exhilarated, feeling more alive than he ever had in his human life. As they were leaving the training grounds, a messenger arrived with news that prompted a dark expression to cross Gideon's features. "The council has been called to emergency session tomorrow, not in 3 days as planned," he informed Morgan. "It seems word of your return has spread faster than anticipated. Lord Sebastian Bloodfang has demanded immediate verification of your identity." "Is that bad?" Morgan asked, toweling sweat from his face. "It's inconvenient," Gideon replied carefully. "You're not fully prepared, and the binding is still largely intact. Sebastian has always been ambitious, and he benefited substantially from the power vacuum left by your family's fall. Your return threatens his position. You think he'll challenge me?" "Not directly, not yet." Gideon's expression was grim. "But he will seek to discredit you, to cast doubt on your identity or your fitness to reclaim the Silver Territory. We must accelerate your preparation. Tonight you will meet with Alara again. She believes she may have identified the nature of the secondary binding your mother placed upon you." The night brought no rest for Morgan. After a brief meal and even briefer period of meditation under Marcus's guidance, he found himself once again in the crystal chamber atop the northern tower. This time, however, the room had been transformed. Complex symbols covered the floor in patterns of silver and midnight blue. Candles burned at strategic points around the perimeter, and the air hummed with power that raised the hair on Morgan's arms. Alara awaited him at the center of the intricate design, her formal robes replaced by simpler attire, more suited to serious magical work. She had been joined by a younger woman Morgan hadn't met before, introduced simply as Mira, her apprentice. I've consulted the ancient texts, Alara explained, as Morgan took his place within the central circle, and I believe I understand what your mother did. The outer binding, the one that suppressed your wolf nature, was meant to hide you from those who would recognize your bloodline. But the inner binding, the containment spell, that was to protect both you and those around you. Protect us from what? Morgan asked, a sense of foreboding settling in his chest. From a rare and potentially dangerous gift that runs in the Silver Moon bloodline, though it typically manifests only in those of the direct royal line. Alara's expression was solemn. The histories call it the Silver Sight, the ability to perceive the true nature of things, to see through deception, and in its most powerful manifestation, to glimpse possible futures. Morgan recalled the words from his fractured memories, his mother's eyes that could see past deception and into the very souls of those they judged. Those with the gift were both revered and feared, Alara continued, revered for their wisdom and ability to guide the pack through dangerous times. Feared because such power in the wrong hands or an untrained mind could be devastating. Devastating how? Morgan pressed. The mind is not meant to perceive all realities simultaneously, Alara replied. Those who could not control the gift were driven to madness by the kaleidoscope of possibilities, the layered truths visible only to them. I believe your mother bound this ability within you until you were mature enough to handle its emergence, until you could be properly trained. The ritual that followed was both more intricate and more subtle than the memory work of the morning. This was not about breaking the binding, that, Alara insisted, would be catastrophically dangerous without proper preparation. Instead, she sought to examine it, to understand its structure and how it might safely be unwoven over time. Morgan sat cross-legged in the center of the ritual circle, focusing on his breathing as Alara had instructed, while she and Mira worked around him, chanting in that ancient language, occasionally placing crystals or herbs at specific points in the pattern. The experience was less dramatic than the memory ritual, but no less profound. Morgan felt as if layers of himself were being gently peeled back, examined, then carefully replaced. Occasionally, a sensation like distant vision would flicker at the edges of his consciousness, impressions of places he had never been, conversations he had never heard, possibilities branching out like rivers from a central stream. When it was finally complete, Alara looked both excited and deeply concerned, an unusual combination on her normally composed features. Your mother's work was masterful, she told Morgan as Mira began clearing away the ritual components. The binding is designed to dissolve gradually as your natural abilities mature, allowing you to adjust to each new level of perception rather than being overwhelmed. But the process has been accelerated by your return to your kind, by the proximity to the full moon, and by the ritual awakening we have initiated. What does that mean for me? Morgan asked, feeling the weight of her concern. It means you will begin to experience flashes of the silver sight soon, perhaps as early as tomorrow's council meeting. These will be unpredictable at first, triggered by strong emotion, physical contact, or proximity to places of power. She placed a hand on his shoulder, her expression grave. When it happens, focus on something physical and immediate, your own heartbeat, the feel of your feet on the ground. This will anchor you to the present reality while the visions pass. Morgan nodded, though uncertainty coiled in his stomach. Another complication, another ability he needed to master in impossibly little time. One more thing, Alara added, her voice dropping to ensure only he would hear. The silver sight is the most likely reason your family was targeted. Such a power, if controlled by those with ill intent, could be weaponized. Be very careful who you trust with knowledge of your awakening abilities. The same forces that destroyed your family may still be active, waiting for the silver moon gift to resurface. Sleep, when Morgan finally returned to his chambers in the northern tower, was fitful and plagued by dreams more vivid than any he had experienced before. He ran through ancient forests in wolf form, sensing rather than seeing the pack around him. He stood before a council of shadows, their faces obscured, but their hostility palpable. He saw Eleanor, her golden eyes holding his as something unspoken passed between them. And always at the edges of these visions, a sense of impending threat, of time running short for reasons he couldn't articulate. He woke before dawn, his body humming with restless energy. Rather than trying to return to sleep, he dressed and made his way to one of the balconies overlooking the palace grounds. The pre-dawn air was crisp with the promise of autumn, carrying scents from the city below and the wilderness beyond. His sharpening senses could distinguish them now. The smoke from early morning fires, the tang of automobile exhaust, and beneath it all, the clean scent of pine and mountainstone that called to something primal within him. Couldn't sleep either? The voice startled him, though some newly awakened instinct had already alerted him to another presence. Eleanor Moonshadow emerged from the shadows of a nearby archway, her movements silent and graceful. She wore simpler attire than at their first meeting, dark trousers and a fitted jacket of deep burgundy, her hair loose around her shoulders. Too much to process, Morgan admitted, turning back to the view rather than revealing how her presence affected him. Eleanor joined him at the balustrade, maintaining a careful distance that nonetheless felt intimate in the pre-dawn stillness. "The first time is always the hardest," she said, her usual mocking tone absent. "The first time?" "The first time your world changes completely." She glanced at him, a hint of genuine sympathy in her golden eyes. "For most of us, it happens gradually. We grow up knowing what we are, learning to control our nature from childhood. You've had it all thrust upon you at once." Morgan studied her profile in the gathering light, struck by the complexity beneath her poised exterior. "Why are you here, Lady Eleanor? I doubt it's concern for my adjustment." A smile curved her lips, appreciative rather than mocking. "Direct, I like that." She turned to face him fully. "I'm here because today's council meeting will determine much about your future, and consequently, about mine. We were betrothed once, bound by a contract between our families. That contract may no longer be legally binding, given the circumstances, but its political implications remain." "And what are those implications exactly?" "That our union would unite North and South, creating a power bloc that could potentially rival the throne itself." Her gaze was steady, assessing. "My father has built our pact's strength carefully over 25 years, expanding into territories once held by your family. He will not relinquish that power easily, even for the return of the legitimate heir." "Is that a threat?" Morgan asked, though he sensed it was more complicated than simple intimidation. "A reality you should be prepared for." She moved closer, close enough that he could detect her unique scent, wild jasmine and something deeper, muskier. "The council will test you today. Sebastian Bloodfang will lead the opposition, questioning your identity, your worthiness, your very right to exist after so many believed you dead. You must be ready to stand your ground." "Why tell me this?" Morgan's eyes narrowed slightly. "Wouldn't your interests be better served if I failed?" Eleanor's laugh was soft and surprisingly genuine. "My interests are not as simple as you might think, Morgan Silverblood." She reached out, her fingertips brushing his cheek in a touch so light it might have been imagined. "Perhaps I'm curious about the man who was once promised to me. Perhaps I want to see what becomes of a silver wolf raised among humans. Or perhaps I simply enjoy complicating my father's carefully laid plans." Before Morgan could respond, she withdrew her hand and stepped back, her expression returning to its usual composed mask. "Wear the formal regalia Nathaniel has prepared for you. Speak only when directly addressed. And whatever you do, do not let them provoke your woe before you are ready to control it. First impressions matter greatly among our kind." With that advice delivered, she turned to leave, pausing only briefly at the archway. "One more thing. If Sebastian mentions the Night of Silver Tears, do not react. That particular provocation is designed to trigger rage in any true Silverblood." "What is the Night of Silver Tears?" Morgan asked. But Eleanor was already gone, leaving him alone with the rising sun and a growing sense that the council meeting would be even more treacherous than he had been led to believe. The council chamber of the Seven Packs occupied the heart of the Obsidian Palace, a vast circular space with a domed ceiling that depicted the night sky in thousands of tiny gemstones. 7 great chairs, each distinct and designed to reflect the pack it represented, were arranged in a semicircle facing the king's throne. Between them stood a circular table of black marble, its surface etched with the territories of all 7 packs in lines of precious metal, silver for the north, gold for the south, copper for the east, and so on. Morgan entered with Gideon, Marcus, and Nathaniel, the formal regalia of the silver pack feeling both foreign and strangely right on his body. The clothing was a blend of ancient tradition and practical design, close-fitting trousers and a tunic of midnight blue, overlaid with a ceremonial vest of silver-gray leather embossed with the wolf symbol of his bloodline. The twin medallions hung prominently at his throat, and a cloak of silver fur draped his shoulders, marking him as royalty among werewolves. The chamber was already occupied by the other pack leaders and their advisors, the atmosphere tense with anticipation. All conversations ceased as Morgan entered, every eye turning to assess the lost heir of the Silver Throne. Darius Moonshadow, Eleanor's father and alpha of the Black Pack, stood near the southern chair, a tall, imposing figure with silver-streaked black hair and the same golden eyes as his daughter, though his held none of her occasional warmth. His formal attire was predominantly black, accented with gold that caught the light as he moved. Beside the eastern chair stood Sebastian Bloodfang, alpha of the Red Pack, and, according to Nathaniel's briefing, the most vocal opponent of Morgan's return. He was a powerfully built man in his early 50s, with russet hair cut military short and eyes of burning amber. The scars visible on his face and hands spoke of countless battles, and the way he carried himself suggested barely contained aggression. The other pack leaders were present as well, but it was Sebastian who stepped forward as Morgan approached the center of the chamber, his expression one of calculated skepticism. "So, this is the miracle we've been summoned to witness," he said, his voice carrying the slight roughness common to those who frequently utilize their wolf form. "The lost heir returned from the dead after 25 years. Convenient timing, wouldn't you say, Your Majesty?" This last was directed at Gideon, a subtle challenge in the tone. Gideon's expression remained impassive. "The timing was determined by Queen Elena's binding spell, Lord Sebastian, not by political convenience. As she foresaw, it began to weaken on his 25th year, allowing us to finally locate him." Sebastian circled Morgan slowly, assessing him with open suspicion. "He certainly has the look of the silver blood line, but looks can be deceiving. What proof do we have beyond these trinkets?" He gestured dismissively to the medallions. "And your word that this is truly Orion and Elena's son." "The medallions are proof enough," Marcus interjected, his voice carrying the weight of his years and station. "They are linked to the bloodline, incapable of being worn by any not of silver descent." "Artifacts can be manipulated," Sebastian countered. "Blood is more certain. I propose the ancient rite of lineage verification." A murmur ran through the assembled leaders. The rite Sebastian suggested was seldom used and notoriously painful for the subject, involving the extraction and magical testing of blood drawn from close to the heart. "That won't be necessary." The voice was female, calm and authoritative, belonging to a woman who had thus far remained silent near the western chair. Lady Victoria Nightshade, ambassador of the Grey Pack, stepped forward into the light. In her mid-40s, she carried herself with the quiet confidence of one secure in her power and position. Her silver-gray hair was swept back from a face of austere beauty, her violet eyes, unusual among werewolves, shrewd and perceptive. "I knew Queen Elena well," Victoria continued. "We were initiates together in the ancient arts. This young man has her eyes, yes, but more importantly, he carries her aura signature. No magic can replicate that." She approached Morgan directly, studying him with those unusual violet eyes. "I would stake my reputation and position on his authenticity." Sebastian's lip curled slightly. "The word of a gray witch is hardly enough." Gideon's voice cut through the tension, firm but not raised. "Lord Sebastian, your concerns are noted, but we have multiple verifications of Morgan's identity. The medallions, the testimony of both General Ironheart and Lady Nightshade, and Dr. Ilara's confirmation of Queen Elena's magical signature in the binding spell. Unless you wish to accuse all of these respected members of our community of deliberate deception, I suggest we move forward with the recognition of Morgan Silverblood as rightful heir to the Silver Territory." For a tense moment, it seemed Sebastian might press his challenge. Instead, he inclined his head in a gesture that acknowledged the king's authority while conceding nothing. As you wish, your majesty, but let the record show that the Red Pack reserves judgment until more substantive proof is provided. His gaze shifted to Morgan, cold and calculating. Perhaps at the upcoming full moon, when we can see if he truly carries the wolf of the silver bloodline, or if this is an elaborate deception. The remainder of the council meeting proceeded with the formal protocols of recognition. Each pack leader except Sebastian, acknowledging Morgan's claim to his birthright with varying degrees of enthusiasm. Darius Moonshadow was particularly interesting to observe. His words were perfectly correct, welcoming the return of the silver heir, while his eyes remained calculating and cold. Throughout the proceedings, Morgan felt increasingly disoriented. The combination of sleeplessness, the accelerating changes in his body, and the intensity of the political maneuvering left him struggling to maintain his composure. Worse, he began to experience what Alara had warned him about, flashes of something beyond normal perception. When Darius approached to formally greet him, their hands clasped in the traditional warrior's grip, Morgan suddenly saw not just the alpha before him, but shadowy figures standing behind him, whispering in his ear. The vision was gone in an instant, leaving Morgan momentarily disoriented but deeply unsettled. The most dramatic moment came when Sebastian, performing his own formal greeting with obvious reluctance, leaned in close enough that only Morgan could hear his whispered words. The night of silver tears is not yet complete. The last silver blood will fall as the others did. Eleanor's warning had prepared Morgan for the reference, but not for what happened next. At Sebastian's words, a surge of fury rose within him, primal and overwhelming. But with it came a flash of the silver sight, a momentary vision of Sebastian kneeling before a hooded figure in a chamber Morgan didn't recognize, receiving instructions he couldn't hear. The strain of controlling both his wolf's rage and the disorienting vision left Morgan visibly pale, his silver eyes flickering with internal light. It took every ounce of his military discipline to maintain his composure, to respond with nothing more than a formal nod before Sebastian withdrew. By the time the council adjourned, Morgan was exhausted, his head pounding with the effort of containing the changes occurring within him. Gideon, noting his condition, expedited their departure from the chamber, guiding Morgan through side passages to avoid further interaction with the other pack leaders. You did well, the king said once they were alone in a small antechamber. Sebastian was deliberately trying to provoke a loss of control that would undermine your credibility. I saw something when he spoke to me, Morgan admitted, sinking into a chair and pressing his palms against his temples. And earlier with Darius. Visions, like Alara warned might happen. Gideon's expression sharpened with interest. The silver sight manifests already? What did you see? Morgan described the shadowy figures behind Darius and the vision of Sebastian receiving instructions from an unknown figure. It was just fragments, there and gone in seconds, but it felt real, like I was seeing something that had actually happened, or something that might happen, Gideon murmured. The silver sight doesn't distinguish clearly between past, present, and possible futures. That's part of what makes it both valuable and dangerous. He studied Morgan with new consideration. We need to accelerate your training. If the sight is awakening, we have even less time than I thought. The remainder of the day was devoted to intensive training, both physical and mental. Marcus took charge of combat training, pushing Morgan to tap into his wolf instincts even while maintaining human form. Alara worked with him on mental discipline, techniques to manage the increasingly frequent flashes of the silver sight. By evening, Morgan was able to partially control his heightened senses, to direct his attention to specific scents or sounds, rather than being overwhelmed by all of them. His strength and speed continued to increase as the binding weakened, though the full transformation remained beyond his reach until the approaching full moon. Your progress is remarkable, Marcus commented as they completed a particularly grueling series of combat drills. Most born werewolves take years to develop the level of control you've achieved in days. I don't have years, Morgan replied, wiping sweat from his brow. Sebastian made that clear enough. The night of silver tears. What did he mean by that? Marcus's expression darkened. It was what some called the massacre of your family. The survivors of the attack described the scene afterward, the moonlight reflecting off the tears of the dying, turning them silver as they fell. His voice grew rough with old grief. It was a deliberate provocation. Sebastian was trying to trigger your rage to make you lose control before the council. He nearly succeeded, Morgan admitted. But something else happened instead. The silver sight activated showed me something about him. That he's involved in whatever conspiracy destroyed your family, Marcus said with grim certainty. I've suspected as much for years, though I've never been able to prove it. The Red Pack gained significant territory after the Silver Pack fell, moving into borderlands that had been disputed for generations. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a palace guard bearing an urgent message for Morgan. An unexpected visitor had arrived, requesting a private audience. The visitor awaited him in a small receiving room near the northern tower. Lady Victoria Nightshade stood at the window, gazing out at the mountains now bathed in the light of the setting sun. She turned as Morgan entered, those unusual violet eyes assessing him with calm intensity. "Thank you for seeing me without notice," she said, her voice carrying the slight accent of the Western Territories. "What I have to say could not wait, nor could it be spoken before the council." "You vouched for me today?" Morgan said. "Why, we've never met." Victoria's expression softened slightly. "I knew your mother well. We studied the old ways together in our youth, before duty called her to the silver throne and me to my own path. Elena was more than a queen to me. She was a friend, one of the few true ones I've known in this life." She moved closer, her gaze never leaving his face. "When I heard rumors of the lost heir's return, I had to see for myself if it could be true. One look at you in the council chamber confirmed it. You have her eyes, her spirit." "You said you have something urgent to tell me," Morgan prompted, sensing there was more to this visit than reminiscence. Victoria glanced toward the door, then back to Morgan. "You are in greater danger than you realize. What happened to your family was not a random attack or a simple power grab. It was the culmination of a plan centuries in the making, orchestrated by a group that has operated in secret since the earliest days of our kind." "What group?" Morgan asked, tension coiling in his stomach. "They have many names through history. Currently, they call themselves the Black Moon Covenant. Their goal is simple and absolute: to control all 7 packs through manipulation, coercion, and when necessary, elimination of bloodlines they cannot bend to their will." Her voice dropped lower. "The Silver Pack was targeted specifically because of the sight. Such power, if harnessed by the Covenant, would make them virtually unstoppable." "How do you know all this?" "Because I've been hunting them for decades," Victoria replied. "After your family fell, I devoted myself to uncovering the truth. I've built a network of informants across all territories, gathered evidence, followed trails long gone cold." She withdrew a small object from within her robes, a data drive, incongruously modern in the ancient setting. "This contains everything I've learned: names, locations, connections. Study it carefully, but trust no one with its contents. The Covenant has agents everywhere, even within the palace walls." Morgan accepted the drive, tucking it securely into an inner pocket of his vest. "Why give this to me now? Why not take it to Gideon?" Victoria's expression grew troubled. "Because I'm not certain the king himself is free from the Covenant's influence. His father almost certainly was involved in covering up the true nature of the attack on your family. Whether Gideon knows this, whether he has continued those connections or broken them, I cannot say with certainty." She placed a hand on Morgan's arm, her touch conveying urgency. "Trust your instincts, and trust the sight when it comes. It will show you truths others cannot see." After Victoria's departure, Morgan retreated to his chambers in the northern tower, his mind racing with implications. If what she said was true, if this covenant truly existed and had orchestrated his family's destruction, then his return represented a threat to their power, one they would surely move to eliminate. As night fell, he examined the data drive, finding it contained thousands of documents, reports, and images compiled over decades. Victoria's investigation had been thorough and meticulous, tracing connections between seemingly unrelated events across generations. The pattern that emerged was chilling: strategic eliminations of potential threats, manipulation of pack politics. the systematic accumulation of power by a select few families across all territories. Most disturbing were the references to the Silver Pack massacre. According to Victoria's evidence, the attack had been planned for months, involving conspirators from at least 3 packs, with the primary goal of eliminating the Silver Moon bloodline and its unique abilities. Morgan was still reviewing the files when a soft knock came at his door. He quickly concealed the data drive before calling for the visitor to enter. Eleanor Moonshadow slipped into the room, closing the door quietly behind her. She wore simple attire suitable for moving unnoticed through the palace, her golden eyes alert and wary. "We don't have much time," she said without preamble. "There's a plot to assassinate you before the full moon. One of the palace guards has been compromised. He plans to poison your evening meal tomorrow." Morgan studied her carefully, searching for any sign of deception. "How do you know this?" "I have my own sources," Eleanor replied. "People who owe loyalty to me rather than my father." She moved closer, her expression unusually serious. "You may have no reason to trust me, Morgan, but I'm not your enemy." "Then what are you?" he asked. "Your father benefited greatly from my family's fall. By all logic, my return threatens his power, and by extension, yours." "Logic doesn't account for everything." Eleanor's gaze was steady, challenging. "Perhaps I have my own reasons for wanting the truth of that night revealed. Perhaps I've spent years watching my father's ambition corrupt everything it touches, including my own future." Before Morgan could respond, pain lanced through his skull, sharper and more intense than any previous episode. His vision blurred, then sharpened to preternatural clarity. But this time, what he saw wasn't a brief flash of insight. It was Eleanor, standing exactly where she was now, but surrounded by a complex web of light and shadow that seemed to represent connections, possibilities, paths diverging and reconnecting. Some of those paths led to darkness, to betrayal, to a knife in his back. But others led to something different. Alliance, strength, something deeper that he couldn't yet name. The vision was overwhelming, too complex to comprehend fully, but it left him with one certainty. Eleanor Moonshadow's destiny was inextricably linked with his own, for good or ill. When his vision cleared, he found her supporting him, her arm around his waist as he sagged against her. Concern had replaced the wariness in her golden eyes. "The sight," she said quietly. "You're experiencing it already. What did you see?" Morgan straightened, gently disentangling himself from her support. "Possibilities," he answered truthfully. "Many paths, not all of them clear." Eleanor studied him with new interest. "The histories say those with the sight could see the truth of a person beyond all deception. What truth did you see in me, Morgan Silverblood?" "That you're more than you appear," he replied. "That your motives are your own, not your father's. And that you're as caught in this web of politics and ancient grudges as I am, though you navigate it with more skill." A smile curved her lips, genuine rather than mocking. "A diplomatic answer. Perhaps you have more of the politician in you than I expected." She stepped back, her expression growing serious again. "Heed my warning about the guard, and prepare yourself for tomorrow night's blood moon ritual. The old magic will be strong, and your wolf will be harder to contain." After Eleanor left, Morgan stood at the window of his tower chamber, gazing up at the waxing moon that would reach fullness in just 2 days. The silver sight was manifesting more frequently now, bringing with it glimpses of a reality more complex and dangerous than he had imagined. Victoria's revelations about the Black Moon Covenant, combined with his own visions, painted a picture of conspiracy reaching to the highest levels of pack society. His wolf stirred restlessly beneath his skin, sensing the approach of its freedom after 25 years of containment. But with that freedom would come greater danger. Not just from those who sought to eliminate the silver bloodline, but from the untamed power within himself that he was only beginning to understand. The lost heir had returned, but the true battle for his birthright was just beginning. The ritual of the blood moon was ancient even by werewolf standards, dating back to the earliest days when the 7 packs first united under a common law. It was rarely performed in modern times, a ceremony reserved for moments of great transition or crisis within the pack hierarchy. Tonight would mark the first blood moon ritual in over 50 years, and the palace hummed with anticipation and tension. Morgan stood at the window of his chambers in the northern tower, watching as the sun dipped below the western mountains. The sky bled crimson and gold, a fitting prelude to the night ahead. His body had been in a state of constant change for days now, muscles shifting beneath his skin, senses sharpening beyond human comprehension, the wolf within growing more insistent with each passing hour. Eleanor's warning about the compromised guard had proven accurate. The would-be assassin had been caught trying to lace Morgan's evening meal with a rare poison that affected only werewolves, causing a painful death that mimicked the symptoms of a failed transformation. Under interrogation, the guard had revealed little about his employers, only that he had received his instructions through an anonymous message along with payment in ancient gold coins, the currency preferred by the Black Moon Covenant for their untraceable transactions. A soft knock at the door preceded Marcus's entrance. The old general had exchanged his usual military attire for ceremonial robes of midnight blue and silver, the traditional colors of a second during the blood moon ritual. His weathered face was solemn, the gravity of the occasion evident in every line. "It is time," he said simply. Morgan nodded, turning from the window to face his mentor. He too had been dressed in ceremonial attire, trousers and tunic of deepest blue, beneath a vest of silver leather embossed with the wolf emblem of his bloodline. Around his shoulders hung a cloak of silver-white fur, and at his throat the twin medallions gleamed in the fading light. "What should I expect?" Morgan asked as they made their way through the winding corridors of the northern tower. Marcus's expression remained grave. "The blood moon ritual serves two purposes tonight. First, to formally recognize you before all packs as the true heir of the Silver Throne. Second, to assist in your first transformation, which will be more difficult than normal due to the binding placed upon you in infancy." He glanced at Morgan, concern evident in his eyes. "It will be painful. The wolf has been caged for 25 years, and it will emerge with all the fury of long imprisonment." They emerged onto the palace grounds, where a procession had formed to escort them to the sacred site. Guards flanked the path, their armor gleaming in the twilight, weapons at the ready. The assassination attempt had put the entire palace on high alert, with Gideon taking personal command of security for the ritual. The journey took them beyond the palace walls, up winding paths that led into the mountains above the city. As darkness fell fully, torches were lit, creating a ribbon of flame that snaked up the mountainside. Morgan could sense other werewolves moving through the forest on either side, guards ensuring their safe passage to the ritual site. The clearing appeared suddenly as they crested a ridge, a perfect circle of stone set into the mountainside. Surrounded by ancient megaliths carved with symbols Morgan somehow recognized despite never having seen them before. At the center stood a raised dais of polished black stone, and above it, perfectly framed between two of the tallest standing stones, hung the moon. Mahamanku moon, larger than Morgan had ever seen it. Tinged with red as it rose in the night sky, the alphas of the seven packs awaited them, arranged in a semicircle around the dais, each with their seconds and key advisors. Gideon stood at the northernmost point, his formal regalia emphasizing his authority. A cloak of black fur over silver armor, the crown of the Alpha King resting upon his brow. To his right stood Alara, prepared to oversee the magical aspects of the ritual. Morgan's gaze was drawn inevitably to the southern position, where Darius Moonshadow stood with Eleanor at his side. The Alpha of the Black Pack cut an imposing figure in his formal attire of black and gold, his expression coldly neutral as he watched Morgan approach. Eleanor's eyes, however, held a warning, her slight nod toward the eastern position directing Morgan's attention to Sebastian Bloodfang. The Alpha of the Red Pack made no attempt to hide his hostility, his amber eyes tracking Morgan with predatory focus. Sebastian had come prepared for combat rather than ceremony, his formal robes doing little to conceal the fighting leathers beneath, or the ceremonial daggers at his belt. Supposedly symbolic but clearly sharpened for use. As Morgan took his place upon the dais, Gideon stepped forward, raising his arms to call the assembly to attention. "Under the blood moon, we gather to witness and affirm," he intoned, his voice carrying to all corners of the clearing. "To recognize blood right and pack law. Tonight, Morgan Silverblood, son of High Alpha Orion, and Queen Elena, heir to the Silver Throne, reclaims his heritage and takes his place among the seven packs." A murmur ran through the assembled werewolves, part anticipation, part tension. Many had come expecting merely to witness a formal ceremony. Others, Morgan sensed, anticipated something far more dramatic. Gideon turned to Morgan, his amber eyes intense in the torchlight. The ritual has three parts. First, the affirmation of blood, to confirm your lineage beyond all doubt. Second, the reclamation of memory, to connect you to the pack knowledge of your ancestors. Third, the awakening of the wolf, to complete your transformation and mark your return to your true nature. His voice lowered slightly. Each stage will test you. Each will bring pain. Are you prepared? Morgan met the king's gaze steadily. I am. The affirmation of blood began with Alara approaching the dais, bearing a ceremonial bowl of hammered silver. The ritual required blood freely given. 7 drops from Morgan, 1 for each of the major packs, mixed with a potion Alara had prepared containing essences gathered from the ancestral territories of the silver pack. As Morgan's blood met the potion, it began to glow with soft silver light that gradually intensified until it illuminated the entire clearing. The assembled alphas murmured in approval and surprise. Such a strong reaction confirmed beyond doubt that Morgan carried the pure bloodline of the Silver Pack's royal line. All except Sebastian, whose expression darkened with each passing moment. A parlor trick, he growled, loud enough for all to hear. Ilara has always favored the northern bloodlines. The potion could easily have been prepared to create this effect. Gideon's expression remained impassive, but his voice carried a dangerous edge. You question the honor of our most respected memory keeper, Lord Sebastian? Perhaps you would prefer to offer an alternative verification? Sebastian stepped forward, a challenge in his stance. The ancient texts speak of a true test for the silver bloodline. If he is indeed the heir, let him call to the guardians of the silver territory. Let him summon the white wolves. A collective intake of breaths swept through the assembly. The white wolves were legendary creatures, neither fully wolf nor fully spirit, said to have formed a pact with the first silver blood alpha thousands of years ago. According to legend, they served as guardians of the pack's ancestral lands, appearing only to those of true silver blood in times of great need or transition. No one has seen the white wolves in over a century, Marcus protested, stepping protectively closer to Morgan. To demand such a test is— I'll do it, Morgan interrupted, surprising himself with the certainty in his voice. Something was stirring within him, a knowledge that came not from his conscious mind, but from somewhere deeper, more primal. He stepped to the edge of the dais, facing north toward the distant peaks where the ancestral territories of the Silver Pack lay. The words came to him in that ancient language, flowing from his lips as naturally as if he had spoken them his entire life. Guardians of blood and stone, keepers of ancient oaths, I call to you under the blood moon. Morgan Silverblood, son of Orion, son of Elena, heir to the silver throne, calls you to witness his return. For a long moment, nothing happened. Sebastian's mouth curled into a triumphant sneer, while murmurs of doubt rippled through the gathering. Then, from deep within the northern forest, came a sound that silenced every voice and stilled every heart. A howl unlike any wolf's call Morgan had ever heard, haunting and otherworldly, carrying notes that seemed to resonate with the very stones beneath their feet. It was answered by another howl, then another, the calls converging as they drew nearer to the ritual site. The forest at the northern edge of the clearing grew suddenly still, the shadows deepening despite the torchlight. And then they appeared, 5 enormous wolves with fur as white as fresh snow, their eyes glowing with an inner blue light that spoke of ancient magic and older packs. They padded silently into the clearing, ignoring the assembled werewolves, their focus entirely on Morgan. The largest of them, a male with scars visible even through his thick white coat, approached the dais and looked up at Morgan with eyes that held intelligence far beyond that of a natural wolf. Without conscious thought, Morgan knelt and extended his hand, palm up in a gesture of greeting that felt as ancient as the stones around them. The white wolf pressed his muzzle briefly against Morgan's palm, a gesture of recognition and acceptance that sent a jolt of energy up at his arm and through his entire body. Then, as silently as they had arrived, the white wolves turned and disappeared back into the forest, their purpose fulfilled. The clearing remained silent for several heartbeats, the assembly stunned by what they had witnessed. It was Victoria who finally spoke, her voice carrying clearly through the night air. The white wolves have acknowledged the heir of the silver throne. Does any among us dare dispute what they have affirmed? All eyes turned to Sebastian, whose expression had transformed from smug certainty to barely contained fury. He said nothing, but the look he cast toward Morgan promised that this matter was far from settled. Gideon nodded to Alara, signaling for the ritual to continue. The second phase, the reclamation of memory, required Morgan to drink from a chalice containing an extract of moonflower and wolfsbane, herbs sacred to werewolves that would help breach the barriers his mother's binding had created in his mind. The effect was immediate and overwhelming. As the potion burned its way through his system, Morgan's vision doubled, then tripled, layers of reality superimposing themselves on the clearing around him. He saw not just the present assembly, but generations of werewolves who had gathered on this sacred ground before them, their forms transparent but distinct, watching the proceedings with solemn interest. Among them, standing closest to the dais, were two figures Morgan recognized instantly: Orion and Elena Silverblood, his parents, their expressions a mixture of pride and concern as they gazed upon their son. They were not truly there, he understood, stood through the haze of the vision. These were echoes, memories preserved in the very stones of this sacred place, accessible only through the ritual and his awakening sight. His mother's spectral form approached him, her silver eyes, so like his own, filled with love and regret. Her lips moved, and though no sound reached his physical ears, her words echoed in his mind with perfect clarity. The binding was necessary, my son, not just to hide you, but to protect the world from power not yet tempered by wisdom. The sight is both gift and burden, the price our bloodline pays for leadership. Use it with care, for what you see shapes what will be. The vision shifted, showing him fragments of the Paytoha, his father uniting fractious northern territories through both strength and diplomacy, his mother using the silver sight to identify threats before they manifested, the two of them standing against encroaching darkness that sought to corrupt the pack from within. And then, with brutal clarity, he saw the night of the attack. The betrayal came from within, trusted guards opening passages to assassins, the fighting desperate and ultimately futile as the Silver Palace was overwhelmed by enemies on all sides. He saw his father fall protecting the nursery where infant Morgan lay, saw his mother perform the binding ritual with her dying breath, saw Marcus carry him to safety while the palace burned. But most importantly, he saw the architects of the massacre, three figures in hooded robes, bearing the symbol of a black crescent moon, directing the attack from a distance. Their faces remained in shadow, but Morgan sensed their identities hovering just beyond his grasp, a truth the sight was trying to show him, but that he wasn't yet strong enough to perceive fully. As the vision faded, Morgan found himself on his knees on the dais, his body trembling with the effort of containing the rush of recovered memory. Marcus knelt beside him, a steadying hand on his shoulder, concern evident in the old general's eyes. "What did you see?" he asked quietly. "Everything," Morgan replied, his voice rough with emotion. "The attack, my parents, the traitors who made it possible." He raised his head, silver eyes blazing with newfound purpose. "And I know what I must do." Before Marcus could respond, Gideon stepped forward, signaling the beginning of the final phase of the ritual, the awakening of the wolf. This would be the most challenging and dangerous part, the forced transformation of a werewolf who had never before changed form, whose wolf had been bound since infancy. "The moon reaches its zenith," Gideon announced. "The time has come for the wolf to break its chains, for the heir to claim his true form. Stand ready, all of you. The first transformation is never gentle, and this one may be more violent than most." Morgan rose to his feet, facing the blood moon that now hung directly overhead, its crimson light bathing the clearing in an otherworldly glow. The change began before the ritual words were even spoken, his body responding to the moon's call and the weakened binding that could no longer contain his true nature. The pain was excruciating, beyond anything he had experienced in his military service or the days of training since his arrival at the palace. It felt as if his bones were shattering and reforming, muscles tearing and reuniting, skin stretching to accommodate a new form. He fought to remain conscious, to maintain some control over the process. But the wolf was too strong, too eager for freedom after its long imprisonment. A sound tore from his throat, beginning as a human scream of pain, but transforming midway into a howl that echoed across the mountainside. His vision blurred, then sharpened to preternatural clarity, colors fading as his perception shifted to a spectrum dominated by scent and movement rather than visual detail. When the transformation was complete, Morgan stood upon the dais in wolf form for the first time. Larger than any natural wolf, his fur the pure silver white that marked the royal bloodline of the Silver Pack, his eyes glowing with the same silver light that had been his mother's legacy. The assembled werewolves stared in awe and in some cases trepidation. No one living had seen a true silver wolf in 25 years, and the power emanating from Morgan's transformed state was palpable, a pressure in the air that raised the hackles of even the most dominant alphas present. It was in this moment, with the ritual completed and Morgan at his most vulnerable as he adjusted to his new form, that Sebastian made his move. The attack came with little warning, just a subtle shift in the Red Alpha's stance that Marcus, with his decades of combat experience, recognized a heartbeat before action. The old general's shout of alarm was lost in the chaos that erupted as Sebastian lunged toward the dais, ceremonial dagger drawn and aimed at Morgan's exposed flank. What Sebastian hadn't counted on was the speed of a newly transformed silver wolf. Despite never having taken this form before, Morgan reacted with instinctive grace, twisting away from the attack with supernatural quickness. The dagger scored a shallow cut along his side but missed the killing blow Sebastian had intended. Guards moved to intervene, but they were blocked by members of the Red Pack who had positioned themselves strategically throughout the gathering. Within moments, the sacred clearing had transformed from ceremonial ground to battlefield, as werewolves from multiple packs drew weapons or began their own transformations. Morgan faced Sebastian across the dais, silver eyes locked with amber, the wolf's instincts urging him to tear out the throat of this enemy who had dared to attack during sacred ritual. But something deeper, the human consciousness that remained even in wolf form, enhanced now by the awakening silver sight, held him back. Sebastian began his own transformation, his form blurring as he shifted into a massive wolf with russet fur and burning amber eyes. As an alpha, his transformed state was impressive, nearly as large as Morgan, with the bulk and muscle mass that came from decades of dominance. The two wolves circled each other on the dais, fangs bared, while battle raged around them. Through his enhanced senses, Morgan was aware of Gideon fighting alongside his royal guards, of Marcus protecting Alara as she worked magic to shield non-combatants, of Victoria Nightshade wielding both blade and spell against Red Pack assassins. And he was aware of Eleanor, fighting not alongside her father, but against him, preventing Darius from joining Sebastian's attack with movements that spoke of long-planned betrayal rather than spontaneous decision. The moment of distraction cost him. Sebastian lunged, jaws snapping at Morgan's throat, forcing him backward toward the edge of the dais. What the Red Alpha possessed in experience, however, Morgan matched in speed and raw power. He twisted aside from the killing bite, then countered with a strike of his own, teeth sinking into Sebastian's shoulder with enough force to draw a yelp of pain from his opponent. They separated, circling again, blood now staining both their coats. Sebastian's eyes burned with hatred and something Morgan now recognized as fear. Fear of what Morgan represented, of the power his return threatened to disrupt, of the truth his awakening sight might reveal. As if triggered by this realization, the silver sight flared to life even in wolf form, showing Morgan not just the Sebastian before him, but the web of connections and motivations that had led to this moment. He saw the Red Alpha kneeling before a hooded figure, swearing fealty to the Black Moon Covenant. Saw him accepting payment for his role in the Silver Pack massacre 25 years ago. Saw him plotting with two other alphas to maintain control of the Northern Territories, to prevent any possibility of the Silver Bloodline's return. Most critically, he saw that Sebastian wore an amulet beneath his ceremonial robes, now hidden in the fur of his transformed state, an amulet designed to absorb magical attacks and reflect them back upon the caster. Any use of magic against him would rebound upon the attacker with doubled force. This insight saved Morgan's life in the next moment, as Sebastian lunged again, this time feinting to the left before attacking from the right. Instead of using the magical abilities beginning to manifest with his transformation, Morgan relied on pure physical prowess, meeting the attack head-on with a counter that sent both wolves tumbling from the dais onto the stone floor of the clearing. They fought with fang and claw, neither able to gain decisive advantage, their massive forms crashing through the battle around them as other werewolves scattered to avoid being caught in the combat between alphas. Morgan could feel his inexperience working against him, his new body responding sometimes too slowly to his commands, unused muscles protesting movements they had never before performed. Yet with each passing moment, the connection between his human mind and wolf body strengthened, the ancient knowledge buried in his bloodline rising to guide his actions. And with it came another realization. Sebastian was not fighting to win, but to delay, to keep Morgan occupied while something else unfolded elsewhere. The silver sight flashed again, showing him fragmented images of the palace, of intruders moving through secret passages, of an objective that remained frustratingly unclear. Whatever Sebastian's true plan entailed, this attack was merely a diversion from the main thrust. Morgan broke away from the fight, blood streaming from multiple wounds but none life-threatening. Rather than pressing his attack, he threw back his head and released a howl that cut through the chaos of battle like a silver blade, a howl that carried authority and command in its very tone, that resonated with the ancient power of the silver bloodline. The effect was immediate and startling. Throughout the clearing, werewolves in both human and wolf form paused, heads turning toward the sound. Even Sebastian faltered, instinctive response to the alpha call momentarily overriding his conscious hostility. In that moment of stillness, Morgan forced himself to shift back to human form, a process nearly as painful as the initial transformation, but accomplished with remarkable speed given his inexperience. He stood facing Sebastian, who remained in wolf form, silver eyes blazing with newfound power and certainty. "This isn't about me," Morgan declared, his voice carrying to all corners of the clearing. "This isn't even about the Silver Pack's return. Sebastian Bloodfang is merely a pawn in a game that has played out for centuries." He pointed directly at the Red Alpha. "Look beneath his fur, at the amulet he wears. The symbol of the Black Moon Covenant is the same organization that orchestrated the fall of the Silver Palace 25 years ago." Sebastian snarled, lunging toward Morgan, but found his path blocked by Gideon and Marcus, both partially transformed into the battle form that combined wolf and human attributes for maximum combat effectiveness. "The attack here is a diversion," Morgan continued, addressing Gideon directly. "The palace is their true target, something hidden there that they've sought for decades." Gideon's eyes widened with realization. "The archive," he said. "The sealed chamber beneath the northern tower that only those of silver blood can access. We always assumed it contained historical records, pack knowledge." "It contains proof," Victoria interrupted, stepping forward despite a wound in her side that stained her gray robes crimson. "Proof of the Covenant's existence, their membership, their plans. Elena showed it to me just once, before sealing it with blood magic that only her heir could break." Understanding dawned on Gideon's face. "They let you return," he said to Morgan. "They've known where you were for years, but they allowed you to come back now to open the archive so they could destroy its contents before anyone else could see them." "Darius," Morgan said, his gaze shifting to where Eleanor still held her father at bay, her blade pressed against his throat. "He's one of the 3 leaders of the Covenant. That's why the betrothal was arranged, to bind the silver and black bloodlines, to bring the silver site under Covenant control." Eleanor's expression confirmed his words, grief and resolve warring in her golden eyes. "I discovered the truth 5 years ago," she said, her voice steady despite the emotion evident in her face. "Found his correspondence with the others, learned what he had done, what he was planning to do when the lost heir was finally located." Darius Moonshadow's aristocratic features revealed nothing, his composure perfect even with his daughter's blade at his throat. "You understand nothing," he said, addressing Morgan directly. "The Silver Pack's power was too great, too dangerous to be controlled by a single bloodline. The site can reshape reality itself in the hands of a fully realized Silver Alpha. The Covenant has maintained balance for millennia, ensuring that no single pack grows powerful enough to dominate the others." "By assassination? By massacre?" Morgan's voice hardened. You murdered hundreds of innocents to eliminate a single bloodline. We eliminated a threat, Darius replied, unrepentant, and we would do so again, had my daughter not interfered with our plans. His golden eyes, so like Eleanor's yet utterly devoid of her warmth, assessed Morgan coldly. You are an aberration, Morgan Silverblood, a relic of a bloodline that should have ended. The archive contains knowledge your kind was never meant to possess, power that no single individual should wield. Before anyone could respond, a howl echoed from the direction of the palace. Not the call of a werewolf, but the otherworldly sound of the white wolves. It was a warning, urgent and unmistakable. They've breached the northern tower, Gideon said, already moving toward the path that led back to the palace. Marcus, secure the prisoners. Victoria, tend to the wounded. Morgan, Eleanor, with me. The descent from the ritual site was a blur of speed and urgency, werewolves moving with supernatural quickness through the forest paths. Morgan found the journey easier in his partially transformed state, a blend of human cognition and wolf physicality that allowed for both strategic thinking and raw power. Eleanor kept pace beside him, her own form shifted to a battle state that emphasized speed, her movements displaying the lifelong training he still lacked. Despite the circumstances, Morgan found himself admiring her grace, the fluid efficiency with which she navigated the difficult terrain. Why didn't you tell me sooner? He asked as they ran, referring to her knowledge of the covenant. Would you have believed me? She replied, golden eyes flashing in the moonlight. A stranger, daughter of the man who benefited most from your family's destruction? I needed you to see the truth for yourself, with your own eyes and the sight that can't be deceived. They reached the palace to find it in chaos. The diversion at the ritual site had allowed Covenant agents to infiltrate the lower levels, overwhelming guards who had been expecting attacks from outside rather than treachery from within. The path to the northern tower was contested, requiring them to fight their way through corridors where loyal palace guards clashed with infiltrators wearing the insignia of multiple packs, evidence of how deeply the Covenant had embedded its agents throughout werewolf society. It was in the central courtyard that they encountered the third architect of the original massacre, the final member of the Covenant's leadership triumvirate. Lord Xavier Greythorn, Alpha of the Shadow Pack, stood flanked by elite warriors directly in their path to the northern tower. Unlike Sebastian and Darius, who had disguised their involvement behind layers of deception and proxy, Xavier made no attempt to hide his allegiance. He wore the symbol of the Black Moon Covenant openly on his ceremonial armor, his expression one of cold determination as he faced them. The heir returns, as was foretold, he said, his voice carrying the distinctive rasp of one who spent more time in wolf form than human. But you are too late. Our agents have already reached the archive. The evidence will be destroyed, and with it, any hope of proving your wild accusations. Gideon stepped forward, his partial transformation advancing further as rage contorted his features. You admit to treason against the throne, to orchestrating the Silver Pack massacre? Treason? Xavier laughed, the sound devoid of humor. Your father understood necessity, Gideon. He sanctioned our actions, recognized that the silver bloodline had grown too powerful, too separate from the checks and balances that govern our society. His gaze shifted to Morgan. Ask yourself why you were never found until now. Not because you were so well hidden, but because powerful figures within all 7 packs preferred you remain lost. Morgan felt truth in the words, bitter as it was to acknowledge. The silver sight confirmed what instinct had already suggested. Gideon's father had indeed been complicit in the massacre, had helped conceal the truth afterward to maintain his own position as Alpha King. My father's sins are not mine, Gideon replied, seeming to read Morgan's thoughts. I have spent a decade searching for the truth, for justice for the Silver Pack, and I will see that justice done, beginning with you, Xavier Greythorn. The battle that followed was swift and brutal. Gideon, as Alpha King and a warrior with decades of experience, engaged Xavier directly. Morgan and Eleanor faced the Shadow Pack guards, fighting back-to-back in a display of coordination that belied their brief acquaintance. Morgan found that his newly awakened abilities served him well in combat, the silver sight allowing him to anticipate attacks moments before they came, to see weaknesses in his opponent's defenses that would otherwise remain hidden. Eleanor fought with the precision of lifelong training, her movements economical and lethal, creating openings that Morgan exploited with raw power and intuitive grace. They broke through the defensive line, leaving Gideon to deal with Xavier while they raced for the northern tower. The White Wolves appeared again as they approached, 5 spectral forms that seemed to materialize from shadow itself, leading them to a hidden entrance Morgan would never have found otherwise. The descent beneath the northern tower took them deep into the foundations of the palace, to chambers so ancient that the stone itself seemed to pulse with accumulated power. At the lowest level, they found a circular chamber with a door of solid silver, inscribed with runes that glowed with internal light. Before the door stood 3 figures in the robes of the Covenant, working complex magic intended to bypass the blood seal that protected the archive. They had made progress. The door was partially transparent now, the magic that had kept it secure for 25 years weakening under their assault. Morgan acted without hesitation, drawing on instincts he hadn't known he possessed. His voice rang out in the ancient language of his bloodline, words of power that countered the Covenant's spell and reinforced the weakening protections. The silver sight guided his actions, showing him the structure of the magical attack and how to dismantle it thread by thread. The Covenant agents turned to face this new threat, abandoning their spell to launch attacks directly at Morgan and Eleanor. Dark magic crackled through the chamber, meeting the silver light that now emanated from Morgan's outstretched hands. Power he was only beginning to understand, but that responded to his need with increasing fluency. Eleanor moved with deadly efficiency, engaging the agents in physical combat while Morgan countered their magic. Her blades flashed in the silvery light, her movements too quick for human eyes to follow as she neutralized 2 of the attackers in rapid succession. The third, evidently the leader, proved more formidable. He abandoned physical attacks in favor of concentrated magical assault, dark energy coalescing into spears of force that Morgan barely deflected. Each exchange drained Morgan further, his newfound abilities taxing reserves of strength he hadn't yet built. It was Eleanor who turned the tide, slipping behind the Covenant agent while he focused on Morgan. Her blade found the gap in his magical defenses, piercing through to the vulnerable flesh beneath. The agent fell, his final spell dissipating into harmless sparks that faded against the chamber walls. "The archive?" Eleanor asked, breathing heavily from the exertion of combat. Morgan approached the silver door, which now gleamed with renewed strength, the blood seal at its center pulsing with ruby light. "It recognizes me," he said, feeling the magic respond to his presence. "But it requires more than proximity. It requires a choice." He placed his palm against the seal, feeling the magic tingle against his skin. "My mother's final message makes sense now. The archive contains knowledge that could tip the balance of power permanently. Secrets of the silver sight, techniques for augmenting its power, perhaps even ways to pass it to bloodlines that don't naturally possess it. That's what the Covenant has truly sought all these years." Eleanor watched him carefully, understanding the magnitude of the moment. "What will you do?" Morgan was silent for a long moment, the weight of decision heavy upon him. Then, with deliberate care, he pressed his palm more firmly against the seal, allowing his blood to make contact with the ancient magic. "I claim my birthright," he said, his voice steady with newfound purpose. "Not to rule, but to protect. Not to dominate, but to restore balance." The door responded to his declaration, and the blood offering, silver surface flowing like water to create an opening into the chamber beyond. The archive of the Silver Pack was revealed for the first time in 25 years, a vast circular room with walls lined in shelving that held not books but crystals, each containing memories, knowledge, and magic preserved through generations of the silver bloodline. At the center stood a pedestal bearing a single object, a journal bound in white leather, its cover emblazoned with the silver wolf emblem of the royal bloodline. "My mother's journal," Morgan said, recognizing it instantly, though he had never seen it before. Her final gift and her final burden. He lifted the journal carefully, feeling the magic bound within its pages responding to his touch. Within these covers lay the evidence Victoria had spoken of, proof of the Covenant's existence, its membership, its centuries of manipulation and occasional bloodshed to maintain control over the 7 packs. "With this, we can expose them all," Eleanor said, her golden eyes fixed on the journal. Not just my father and the other leaders, but every member throughout the packs, every agent placed in positions of influence. And throw our entire society into chaos, Morgan replied, seeing the implications with the clarity the silver sight now afforded him. Hundreds, perhaps thousands implicated. Pack turned against pack, family against family, in an orgy of retribution that could destroy everything our ancestors built. Eleanor's expression grew troubled. Then what was the point of all this? Of preserving the evidence, if not to use it? Morgan opened the journal, finding not just written accounts but crystals embedded in the binding, containing memories his mother had preserved. Irrefutable evidence that could not be dismissed or denied. But there was something else as well, something that became clear as he scanned the final entries. She knew, he said softly. She foresaw all of this. Not the details, perhaps, but the broad strokes. She bound my wolf in the site not just to protect me, but to ensure I wouldn't return until the moment was right for change, rather than vengeance. He looked up at Eleanor, silver eyes meeting gold in the crystal-reflected light of the archive. The journal's last entry speaks of a vision she had, of her son standing with the daughter of her enemy, finding a third path between destruction and capitulation. She saw us, Eleanor, together. Eleanor's breath caught, her composed facade cracking to reveal vulnerability beneath. Together, how? As leaders of a new council, one that would replace both the corrupt covenant and the flawed system of the seven packs. A council based on merit and proven loyalty rather than bloodline alone. Morgan held out the journal, offering it for her inspection. She called it the Silver Moon Council, combining the strengths of both our bloodlines while eliminating the weaknesses. Before Eleanor could respond, sounds of combat reached them from the levels above. Gideon and his forces engaging the remaining Covenant agents who had infiltrated the palace. Their time in the archive was limited. We need to return to the surface, Eleanor said, practical concerns temporarily overriding the weight of revelation. Decisions about the future can wait until the present is secured. Morgan nodded, replacing the journal on its pedestal for safekeeping. As they turned to leave, he paused, struck by a sudden realization. There's one more thing I need to do before we go. Guided by instinct and the awakening knowledge of his bloodline, Morgan approached a specific section of the archive where crystals glowed with particular intensity. These contained not just memories or knowledge, but active spells, workings of power laid down by generations of silver alphas for future need. He selected one that called to him on a level beyond conscious thought, a crystal that pulsed with silver blue light in perfect rhythm with his heartbeat. Upon contact, the knowledge it contained flowed into him, a spell of binding and revelation designed to identify those who had sworn allegiance to forces that worked against the greater good of all packs. The magic required blood freely given and purpose absolutely clear. Morgan made a small cut across his palm with a ceremonial dagger hanging nearby, then spoke the words the crystal had imparted, setting in motion magic that had lain dormant for generations. As they emerged from the archive, the effects of the spell were already spreading throughout the palace and beyond, a silver mist that touched each werewolf it encountered, harmless to most, but causing those who had sworn allegiance to the covenant to be marked with a glowing symbol above their hearts, visible to all. The battle in the upper levels faltered as combatants on both sides witnessed the magic at work, revealing covenant agents among palace guards, among the diplomatic corps, even among Gideon's trusted advisors. The king himself stood in the main courtyard, expression grim, as he witnessed the extent of infiltration his palace had suffered. Xavier Greythorn lay defeated at his feet, the covenant symbol glowing accusingly on his chest. Sebastian had been captured at the ritual site, according to reports from returning guards, and Darius remained in Eleanor's custody, his aristocratic composure finally cracking as the evidence of his treachery became visible for all to see. "What have you done?" Gideon asked as Morgan and Eleanor approached, his tone suggesting he already suspected the answer. "Fulfilled my mother's final wish," Morgan replied. "Not vengeance, but truth. Not destruction, but the opportunity for genuine change." In the days that followed, the full impact of the Blood Moon ritual and its aftermath rippled through werewolf society. The exposure of the Black Moon Covenant forced a reckoning that many had long sought to avoid, bringing to light centuries of manipulation and occasional atrocity committed in the name of balance and control. Morgan found himself in an unprecedented position, technically the rightful alpha of the Silver Pack, but with no actual pack to lead, as the survivors of the massacre had long since been absorbed into other territories. Rather than immediately reclaiming the northern lands, he proposed something radical, a restructuring of the entire pack system. The Silver Moon Council, as Morgan and Eleanor presented it to the remaining loyal alphas, would replace both the corrupt Covenant and the increasingly dysfunctional Council of Seven. Leadership would be determined by demonstrated merit and loyalty rather than bloodline alone, though the traditional territories would remain largely intact for practical purposes. Most revolutionary was the proposed sharing of power between Morgan and Eleanor, a formal alliance between silver and black bloodlines, but not through the traditional method of marriage alliance. Instead, they would serve as co-leaders of the council, each bringing different strengths and perspectives to the governance of their kind. Opposition came from expected quarters. Traditionalists balked at the dismantling of hierarchies that had stood for millennia. Those who had benefited from Covenant influence fought to maintain their positions. But with the evidence from the archive now public, with the Journal of Queen Elena providing irrefutable proof of conspiracy and murder, even the most entrenched resistance gradually gave way. Gideon, in perhaps his most meaningful act as Alpha King, formally endorsed the creation of the Silver Moon Council, surrendering certain royal prerogatives while maintaining his position as final arbiter in matters that affected all territories equally. It was a compromise that allowed for change without complete disruption, evolution rather than revolution. 3 months after the Blood Moon ritual, Morgan stood atop the northern tower, watching the sun set over territories that were once again acknowledged the domain of the Silver Pack. Reconstruction had begun on the Silver Palace, abandoned for 25 years but not forgotten. Its restoration a symbol of renewal, rather than simple return to the past. Eleanor joined him at the balustrade, her presence now familiar and welcome rather than challenging. Their relationship had evolved in unexpected ways since that night in the archive. Personal feelings complicated by political realities. Mutual respect gradually deepening into something neither was quite ready to name. The first meeting of the full council is set for the winter solstice, she said, golden eyes reflecting the sunset as she gazed over the landscape. Appropriate timing, don't you think? The darkness of the year giving way to gradual return of light. Morgan nodded, appreciating both the symbolism and the practical considerations. Victoria reports that the last of the Covenant cells in the Western Territories has been dismantled. Sebastian and your father remain in custody, but most of the lower-ranking members have accepted the amnesty in exchange for full disclosure. And the Silver site, has it stabilized? Eleanor's question held genuine concern. The weeks following his first transformation had been difficult, the site manifesting unpredictably and sometimes overwhelmingly as his mother's binding dissolved completely. Alara's training has helped, Morgan replied. I can control it now, direct it rather than being subjected to its whims, though it still surprises me sometimes. He turned to face her fully, silver eyes meeting gold with newfound confidence. It showed me something interesting this morning. About us. Eleanor's eyebrow arched slightly, curiosity warring with caution in her expression. Did it now? And what did this vision reveal? Possibilities, Morgan said simply. Many paths, some clearer than others, but all of them shared one common element. He reached out slowly, giving her time to withdraw if she chose, and took her hand in his. In every future where our people thrived, where the balance we seek was achieved, we stood together, not just as political allies or co-leaders of the council, but as something more. Eleanor didn't pull away, though surprise flickered across her features. Your mother's journal mentioned an alliance between our bloodlines. I assumed she meant the political union we've created. I think she meant that too, Morgan acknowledged. But I also think she understood something fundamental about our bloodlines, about the silver and the black, about why they've always been both drawn to and repelled by each other throughout history. And what's that? Eleanor asked, her voice softer than usual, betraying emotion she typically kept carefully controlled. Balance, Morgan said simply. The site needs grounding, perspective, a counterweight to its overwhelming possibilities. And that's what your bloodline provides. Pragmatism, tactical thinking, the ability to make hard choices when necessary. His thumb traced circles on the back of her hand, the gesture intimate despite its simplicity. The silver moon isn't just a political symbol, Eleanor. It's a recognition that light and dark, sight and action, possibility and decision, they need each other to create something greater than either can be alone. Eleanor was silent for a long moment, her golden eyes searching his face as if looking for deception or manipulation. Finding none, she allowed a genuine smile to curve her lips. A pretty theory, she said, her tone warming. But theories need testing, don't they? Over time, under various conditions, before they can be accepted as truth. Morgan smiled in return, recognizing her response for the tentative acceptance it was. We have time now. That's what all this has been for. To create the time and space for genuine change, for healing old wounds, for building something new from the ashes of the old. As darkness fell over the northern territories, the first stars appearing in the twilight sky, Morgan Silverblood stood with Eleanor Moonshadow, their hands still joined, their future uncertain, but full of possibilities that neither of their bloodlines alone could have imagined. The lost heir had returned, not to restore the past, but to forge a new future, one where the silver sight served all packs equally, where ancient enemies could become allies, where balance came not from manipulation and control, but from mutual respect and shared purpose. And somewhere in the forest to the north, the white wolves howled their approval of what was beginning, a new chapter in the ancient story of the seven packs, written in silver moonlight and the promise of dawn.